I have long tried to understand what kind of lack it is in English music that manifests itself in so many of its representations. What is missing from this nation? Kindness, love of people, humor, or aesthetic sense? No, one can find all these attributes in England, some of them more noticeably than amongst ourselves. And yet it is the only cultured nation without its own music. Oskar Schmidt's The Country Without Music, 1904. The notion that England was a land largely bereft of indigenous art music wasn't merely the construction of a chauvinistic German social critic seeking to advance his country's prestige at the dawn of the 20th century. Indeed, the image of Britain's creative infertility in the musical realm was widely held throughout Europe and within England. Although the country had produced scores of important composers during the Renaissance and in the early Baroque period, including John Dunstable, Thomas Tallis, John Taverner, William Byrd, John Dowland, and Orlando Gibbons, the death of Henry Purcell in 1695 became a point of demarcation. During the following 2 centuries, England failed to produce a single composer of international standing. The most plausible explanation for this interruption can be found in the unlikely ascension of the Hanoverian King George I to the British throne. An Act of Parliament in 1701 had decreed that no Catholic could attain the crown, and thus when Queen Anne died 13 years later, George was made sovereign after no less than 56 of the Queen's blood relatives holding superior hereditary claims were bypassed, effectively bringing hundreds of years of British stewardship of the monarchy to a close. The elevation of a German who struggled with the English language and spent a fifth of his reign living in his native land would profoundly affect British music. The influence of English composers waned as George and his descendants from the House of Hanover reflexively looked towards Germany for musical talent, creating an environment in which composers such as Handel, Haydn, and Mendelssohn became dominant cultural figures in Britain. Edward Elgar was an improbable candidate for the task of bringing about a renaissance in English art music. Born in 1857 near the West Midlands city of Worcester, his roots were decidedly working class. His father was a piano tuner and music shop owner who met and courted his future wife at a local tavern where she tended bar. Raised as a Catholic at a time when the religion was still widely stigmatized in England, Edward would suffer his entire life from profound feelings of insecurity and a chip on his shoulder about his social status. One scholar described it as more like a plank that would motivate his aggressive pursuit of official honors and the construction of an image in which he was depicted as the epitome of high Edwardian respectability. Although Elgar learned to play the violin well and the piano passably, as a composer he was largely self-taught. His family's meager financial resources thwarted his goal of studying at the Leipzig Conservatory, and thus he entered his chosen profession as a talented musician with little formal training. Over the first 20 years of his career, he struggled mightily to establish his reputation, eventually achieving some notoriety as a regional composer. But by the end of the century, he was 42 years old and still earning a humble living for himself and his family, primarily as a private music teacher. The creation of Elgar's Enigma variations was serendipitous. One evening in October of 1898, he was at home, casually improvising at the piano. His wife Alice, whose musical opinions he valued highly, mentioned that she liked a theme he was playing and asked what it was. "Nothing," he said, "but something might be made of it." Jokingly, Elgar began to improvise settings of the theme that reflected personality traits of various friends, and soon the conceptual basis for what Alice called something which has never been done before came into view. Over the next 4 months, he took his original theme, which in its lyricism and assertive intervallic structures provided a wealth of developmental material, and crafted a set of 14 variations he analogized to individual literary vignettes in which some personal characteristic or experience shared by the composer and the subject served as a source of inspiration. He whimsically indulged his passion for ciphers and mysteries by using initials and nicknames to denote the people depicted in the variations, and cryptically included the word Enigma at the top of the score. He would imply that this heading referred to an overarching, hidden theme that's embedded in the piece. But after generations of enthusiastic sleuthing by musicians, scholars, and amateurs, it remains unrevealed. Dedicating the work to my friends pictured within, he sent the score to the eminent German conductor Hans Richter, an important figure in London's musical life over the previous 2 decades. Richter agreed to present the piece, and the premiere of the Enigma variations took place in the English capital on June 19, 1899. The success of this work, which was followed by his masterful oratorio The Dream of Gerontius in 1900 and his popular Pomp and Circumstance marches shortly thereafter, not only marked Elgar's professional breakthrough, it re-established a confidence in England's capacity to produce composers of international merit that would inspire subsequent composers such as Vaughan Williams, Holst, Walton, Britten, and Tippett. Elgar's importance to British music was beautifully articulated by his friend Alice Stewart Wortley in a remark she made shortly after the composer's death in February of 1934. He was our Shakespeare of music, born and died on the soil in the heart and soul of England, with a love of his country, its music, and its meaning in his own heart and soul.